are really an admirable tonic, much better than what Sir Andrew prescribes for me. You must tell me what people you would like to meet, though. I want it to be a delightful gathering."
"I like men who have a future and women who have a past," he answered. "Or do you think that would make it a petticoat party?"
Meaning, all women have a past and very few men have a future. Another social commentary, snuck in there. "I fear so," she said, laughing as she stood up. "1,000 parties, my dear Lady Ruxton," she added. "I didn't see you hadn't finished your cigarette."
"Never mind, Lady Narborough. I smoke a great deal too much. I am going to limit myself for the future." "Pray don't, Lady Ruxton," said Lord Henry. "Moderation is a fatal thing. Enough is as bad as a meal. More than enough is as good as a feast."
Lady Ruxton glanced at him curiously.
"You must come and explain that to me some afternoon, Lord Henry. It sounds a fascinating theory," she murmured as she swept out of the room.
"Now mind you don't stay too long over your politics and scandal," cried Lady Narborough from the door. "If you do, we are sure to squabble upstairs." The men laughed, and Mr. Chapman got up solemnly from the foot of the table and came up to the top. Dorian Gray changed his seat and went and sat by Lord Henry. Mr. Chapman began to talk in a loud voice about the situation in the House of Commons. Politics, in other words. He guffawed at his adversaries. The word doctrinaire, a word full of terror to the British mind, reappeared from time to time between his explosions, and the alliterative prefix served as an ornament of oratory. He hoisted the Union Jack on the pinnacles of thought, the inherited stupidity of the race, sound English common sense, he jovially termed it, was shown to be the proper bulwark of society. A smile curved Lord Henry's lips, and he turned round and looked at Dorian.
"Are you better, my dear fellow?" he asked. "You seemed rather out of sorts at dinner."
"I am quite well, Harry. I am tired, that is all."
"You were charming last night. The little Duchess is quite devoted to you. She tells me she's going down to Selby. She has promised to come on the 20th. Is Monmouth to be there too?"
"Oh, yes, Harry. Monmouth is, of course, sort of a castle and place name. This guy is the Duke of Monmouth, the husband of the Duchess. If you know British society, you understand what's going on. So I think the implication here is that Dorian is having an affair with this young woman named the Duchess of Monmouth, and he's inviting her and her husband down to his house where he's going to continue his affair with her. It seems kind of dangerous, but we're setting up a future chapter, so this is sort of foreshadowing events that are going to happen in a chapter, a couple chapters down the line. Let's see.
Is Monmouth going to be there too?
Oh, yes, Harry.
He bores me dreadfully, almost as much as he bores her. She is very clever, too clever for a woman. She lacks the indefinable charm of weakness. It is the feet of clay that make the gold of the image precious. Her feet are very pretty, but they are made of not feet of clay, white porcelain feet, if you like. They have been through the fire, and what the fire does not destroy, it hardens. She has had experiences."
"How long has she been married?" asked Dorian.
"An eternity, she tells me. I believe, according to the peerage, it is 10 years, but 10 years with Monmouth must have been like eternity.
What with time thrown in.
Who else is coming?"
"Oh, the Willoughbys, Lord Rugby and his wife, our hostess Geoffrey Colston, the usual set. I have asked Lord Grothian."
"I like him," said Lord Henry. "A great many people don't, but I find him charming. He atones for being occasionally somewhat overdressed by being always absolutely overeducated. He's a very modern type."
That's another recycled line from The Importance of Being Earnest. Algernon said it about himself. I don't know if he will be able to come, Harry. He may have to go to Monte Carlo with his father.
What a nuisance people's people are. Try and make him come. By the way, Dorian, you ran off very early last night. You left before 11. What did you do afterwards? Did you go straight home?
No. This is an interesting question because Dorian killed Basil last night, right? And Lord Henry's sort of asking about it. Dorian glanced at him hurriedly and frowned. "No, Harry," he said at last. "I did not get home until nearly 3.
"Did you go to the club?"
"Yes," he answered, then bit his lip. "No, I don't mean that. I didn't go to the club. I walked about. I forget what I did." "How inquisitive you are, Harry. You always want to know what one has been doing." It's like he doesn't have an alibi and he's trying to come up with one. "I always want to forget what I have been doing. I came in at 2:30, if you wish to know the exact time. I had left my latchkey at home, and my servant had to let me in. If you want any corroborative evidence on the subject, you can ask him." Good God. I mean, corroborative evidence? He's using legal terminology
to defend himself from just a simple question about Lord Henry. It shows how on edge Dorian is, but again, he's just not a smart man. And I think we've established this a number of times. Sorry, suddenly started to rain outside. It's making some noise outside my window. Lord Henry shrugged his shoulders. My dear fellow, as if I cared. Let us go to the drawing room. No, Cherry, thank you, Mr. Chapman. Something has happened to you, Dorian. Tell me what it is. You are not yourself tonight. Don't mind me, Harry. I am irritable and out of temper. I shall come around and see you tomorrow or next day. Make my excuses to Lady Narborough. I shan't go upstairs. I shall go home. I must go home. All right, Dorian. I dare say I shall see you tomorrow at tea time. The Duchess is coming. I'll try to be there, Harry, he said, leaving the room. As Dorian Gray drove back to his own house, he was conscious that a sense of terror he thought he had strangled had come back to him. I like this word strangled because it goes back to hanging, which is the punishment if he ever gets caught for murdering Basil. Lord Henry's casual questioning had made him lose his nerve for a moment, and he wanted his nerve still. Things that were dangerous had to be destroyed. Pause. That line's interesting. Things that were dangerous had to be destroyed. If you're paying attention to the story, you remember that Basil had a suitcase and a jacket and that Dorian hid them in a secret compartment. So that's evidence that he still needs to destroy. So if you're thinking about it from sort of like a... Remember, this suddenly became a little bit like one of those really famous Victorian crime and detection novels, like a Sherlock Holmes or something like that. It always had a little bit of that element and a little bit of the Gothic going on, but with Basil's murder, I feel like it really jumped into that genre in a way that it hadn't before. So, as a reader, you're going to be going through the same processes that you might in a Sherlock Holmes story or something like that, except that we know who the murderer is. So there's an element of dramatic irony in this one that you don't necessarily have with Holmes or Dupin or, like some of those other Victorian era crime and detection stories. Let's see. Things that were dangerous had to be destroyed. He winced. He hated the idea of even touching them, yet it had to be done. He realized that, and when he had locked the door of his library, he opened the secret press into which he had thrust Basil Hallward's coat and bag. A huge fire was blazing. He piled another log on it. The smell of the singeing clothes and burning leather was horrible. It took him 3/4 of an hour to consume everything. At the end, he felt faint and sick, and having lit some Algerian pastilles, that's incense probably, something to clear the aroma in the room, in a pierced copper brazier, he bathed his hands and forehead with cool musk-scented vinegar. Suddenly he started. His eyes grew strangely bright, and he gnawed nervously at his underlip. Between two of the windows stood a large Florentine cabinet made out of ebony and inlaid with ivory and blue lapis. He watched it as though it were a thing that could fascinate and make afraid, as though it held something that he longed for and yet almost loathed. This is a weird transition. He's starting to stare at this cabinet with both longing and hatred. We'll have to read more to try and figure out what's going on. He lit a cigarette and then threw it away. His eyelids drooped till long fringed lashes almost touched his cheek, but he still watched the cabinet. At last he got up from the sofa on which he had been lying, went over to it, and having unlocked it, touched some hidden spring. A triangular drawer passed slowly out. His fingers moved instinctively toward it, dipped in, and closed on something. It was a small Chinese box of black and gold dust lacquer, elaborately wrought. The sides patterned with curved waves, and the silken cords hung with round crystals and tasseled with plated metal threads. He opened it. Inside was a green paste, waxy in luster, the odor curiously heavy and persistent. It never says what this is, but it's probably opium. I mean, when you look at it, he's thinking about this cabinet. He can't get his eyes off of it. He has both a desire and a dread or a love and a hate for it. That's a very druggish sort of image. The other possibility is that it could be some poison. He could be contemplating suicide. I don't know that's really borne out by the rest of his actions. But he did say he wished it was the end of the world and that he was finding himself bored with life. So there are some hints to that. Anyway. He hesitated for some moments with a strangely immobile smile upon his face. Then, shivering, though the atmosphere of the room was terribly hot, he drew himself up and glanced at the clock. It was 20 minutes to 12. He put the box back, shutting the cabinet doors as he did so, and went to his bedroom. As midnight was striking bronze blows upon the dusky air, Dorian Gray dressed commonly
and with a muffler wrapped around his throat, crept quietly out of his house. In Bond Street, he found a hansom with a good horse. That's a taxi, essentially. He hailed it, and in the low voice gave the driver an address. The man shook his head. "It's too far for me," he muttered. "Here's a sovereign for you," said Dorian. "You will have another if you drive fast." "All right, sir," answered the man. "You will be there in an hour." And after his fare got in, he turned his horse round and drove rapidly toward the river. So Dorian gets a cab, essentially, and he said, I want to go somewhere far away. It's going to take an hour for him to get there. And the guy is like, yeah, no, I can't do that. And so he basically pulls out a $100 bill, and he's like, I'll give you another one when we get there. And the guy's like, all right. And so he rides off toward the river. That's going east. He's heading into the East End. That's a bad part of the city. He's dressed commonly. We don't know exactly what he's doing here, but he's going on another sort of double life version. And it's been hinted at. You remember chapter 11, that big old montage chapter in chapter 12 when he was talking to Basil. There have been all these stories about him frequenting bad places near the docks. So he's going into the East End to do something, and we don't know what it is, but it's probably hinted at with that opium reference and stuff like that. So you can sort of guess what he's going to be up to. I think this is also interesting because the last time that we heard about Dorian having a mad desire to go to the East End, it was when he met Sybil Vane. So there's maybe some connection there as well. But I will stop and call this done and upload this to YouTube for you, and we'll continue, hopefully get in chapter 16 this week as well. There's 20 chapters in the book, so we're starting to wrap it up. We got 4 chapters left, and maybe we can have it done this week or next. Thanks. See ya.